Hello, welcome to my live stream. This is a channel I put together for discussion with people about topics and ideas that they follow, they have an interest in, and I would actually like to talk to them to get their take on the things that they believe in. I've restarted up my channel after a few years of idleness, and I'm attempting actually to build up a subscription list to actually be able to activate the YouTube monetary system. I actually don't know what they call it. I'm just calling it the monetary system. How you make money off of YouTube. I'm trying to get that active, and we need, or I should say, I need 1,000 subscribers and a 4,000 hour view count. I think it's 4,000 hours for the activation of that program on YouTube. And so I'm hoping that if you're here and viewing my YouTube live, you'll certainly actually want to actually join my channel, and that would be fantastic. If you listen to this later on and you find it interesting and it's something that catches your attention, and you would like to join, certainly that would be absolutely fantastic also. And if you can watch as much as possible, that would be good too, because that's the other aspect of actually getting the program activated. Okay, with all that said, I'm actually going to go into the process of starting the actual process or activity that I'm going to be performing today, unless I get people to come on board and actually want to talk with me. I'm actually going to be reviewing a video again, and it's going to be in light with respect to the topic that I have been reviewing for the past couple of weeks now. And actually, that is the concept of God and the belief in a God. I'd like to know why people actually believe in a God, and I'd like to actually ask some questions about that until I actually get that interaction with people in a direct sort of fashion. I will be reviewing YouTube content at this point in time with respect to videos that actually have a declaration of belief and proof, which is something I'm actually looking for, is that aspect of proof. The current video is a video that's based on a scientific experiment, which actually is actually quite an old scientific experiment, physics experiment, called the double slit. It's double slit experiment, obviously, but double slit in general. It's a premise of actually how particles behave and how the evaluation of this video has come to the conclusion that that actually is a representation or a indication of a God. So I'm going to start the video now. No, I'm not listening to music.
Trying to explain how particles behave, scientists stumbled upon something far greater. Evidence that the universe is not random, not mechanical, but conscious. That it's been observed all along. This isn't a myth or spiritual metaphor. It happened.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm actually on the right video. Yep, I'm on the right video, double slit. Apologize for that. Okay, so this is just a statement that's being made about the aspect that something's been observed, and I was going to say there are consequences. I guess in general there's conclusions that are being made.
In this video, we explore what really happened during that experiment, how consciousness and observation are fundamentally linked, and why this hidden truth is so rarely talked about. Once you hear the full story, you may realize that science hasn't disproven God. It may have revealed him. At the heart of this story lies one of the most famous and controversial experiments in modern physics, the double slit experiment.
Okay, so that's just a declaration of what actually is going to be evaluated and reviewed. And it's a double slit experiment. And I actually remember, being presented this experiment in university in one of my very first physics class. And it's the aspect of what happens specifically with we'll call it a particle, even though it's actually quantity-wise is actually very, very small. It's at the quantum level of particle information, I guess, or declaration or points. And this is going to go in to talk about what actually happened and why it happened. Now, this actually started way, way, way long time ago in the aspects of determining actually how light behaves. And there was an indication that light appeared to be behaving in an aspect of wave, operated like a wave pattern, and also operated in the aspect of a particle. And there was some continuation with the investigation, and the double slit experiment actually is a continuation of that, and conclusions that were made and observations that were done that provided questions, because I was going to say explanation, because the end result actually is there's a lot of stuff that happened that still to this day actually have no explanation.
On the surface, it was a basic attempt to understand how particles behave when passed through two narrow openings. Scientists expected them to act like tiny billiard balls, either going through one slit or the other. But the outcome was far stranger. When not being observed, particles created an interference pattern, behaving like waves. But when someone observed them, they collapsed into particles again. In other words, the act of observation changed their behavior.
Okay, so this is the premise of this particular experiment, and it actually does generate results that are difficult to understand. This aspect of, they use the term billiard balls, excuse me. I can't say the words I want to say today. And it actually is dealing with, particles at the quantum level, basically at the atomic level. And that's got to do with respect to actually how this experiment is done, the things that are being evaluated have to be extremely small because of the conditions of the experiment that's being done. And to really to go over again what was stated in the video itself is the aspect of what was being observed is that when particles went through the double slit, there was an appearance of what is known as a wave pattern, or that's what was observed, a wave pattern, or a term they used to actually describe what a wave pattern would look like when it actually hit an observation point, which is basically what this experiment did. It actually had a backing surface that actually had the ability to register impacts of particles, and it generated what they call an interference pattern. And that basically just the aspect of when you have waves happening, which is the end result of this experiment, is not a wave, it actually is multiple waves. That's where you get the interference pattern from, is the fact that you have multiple multiple waves interfering with each other. And the whole aspect is when you got a trough and a peak hitting each other, they'll either maximize or minimize result on the registration board or the backboard or whatever way that actual observation was being performed. And it produced what they called a interference pattern. That interference pattern basically is what they conclude is a result of basically wave interaction, for lack of a better word. I can't think of the scientific word, but basically it's the interference of waves across each other. Now, the idea was that, or at least the expected result was that you would just see basically a stream of hits on the backing board that just identified the aspect of when a particle went through the slit, it would hit the back of the board, basically in consequence of somewhere in the back of where the slit is. And of course, it's got a range because you don't know where it's actually hitting in that, how it's going through that slit. If it hit, let's say, hit a wall on the board, and it would just basically have a little bit of movement, across the slit, and basically resulted in a region in the back that shows this is where the pattern occurred for the particles going through the slit. But what they found was that when the particles were going through the slit, it was producing the interference pattern that I mentioned, which is the conclusion of a waves, if you want to be more concrete or more explicit, more correct. These are waves that are going through and generating this result. And that baffled the minds of the scientists performing it because they didn't know how that could happen. Because they were looking at it from the aspect of saying, using the concept that they actually described in this video, which is a billiard ball, which it's not, but they're trying to get the aspect of saying, we got this thing, this piece of matter, for lack of a better way of saying that, it's going through, and it's just going through, and it should just hit the back. But it's not. The result is it appears to be behaving like a pattern. They didn't know. They had some sort of concept that gave the idea of how a pattern would happen based on possibly actually how the particles were behaving when they were going through the slit. And the whole aspect of some of them got to do with the aspect of it was just converting into basically a wave pattern because it's converting into an energy source or energy form. And that energy form would basically be propagating through space as a wave. Now, that's one of the concepts they had in. But the big question here is that when they viewed it with respect to monitoring, what was used here, described here as observing, that the pattern actually changed from basically what was initially thought to happen or supposed to happen, which is basically that region of pattern, that the hits happening on the backboard in a region just behind the slit is what was expected. And they were saying sometimes they were seeing that. And sometimes they weren't seeing that. That's basically the aspect of saying when the particles were being observed, you saw something, and when they weren't being observed, you saw something else. And that's basically the gist of the question mark behind this observation. And the video is actually making an incorrect presentation, which is using the explanation of observation being something done from a person, for lack of a better way of saying that, was the cause of the difference between a wave and a particle. That's 100% correct. It doesn't have to be, and it's not. It's not an observation of a person. It's actually a monitoring of the particle with some sort of, tool that actually is going to be registering the particles as they go through. That's actually what's happening. And that actually is the explanation that's given out for the differences between the two types of results. Is that you have a wave or you have particle. Had nothing to do with observation. it's unfortunate in the scientific community is the fact that they use that terminology. That was a mistake on the scientific realm, is that they said, when an observation happens, this is the result. And they should have not said that, because they should have known that there were going to be people that are actually going to be taking that as a direct indication of activity happening from a humanistic point of view. And it's not. But again, these questions actually came up, and the scientists actually did explain what they meant, and they actually have been explaining that since it actually was observed initially. They said, we see these results, and this is a consequence of these results. And we don't know how these consequences are happening. But again, the video here is starting the aspect of this premise of this is a proof of the existence of a God. And what I'm saying is, what they're indicating is false. It's a lie. Now, why they chose to do that, I don't know. I just want to make sure that we do know that this is something that is out there. So let's go double slit double slit pattern occurs. I should have done it this way. Does double slit pattern occur if monitor is observed by a person? Which is the, I'll say conclusion. It's not the word I really want to use, but basically the video is indicating that this result is occurring because somebody observed it. And that's not actually the truth. So let's see what they say. It's good because Google now is actually using AI for... okay, so they say here in the Google result is, yes, the double slit interference patterns can still occur if a monitor is being observed. But the observation is not the trigger for the change. The pattern is a result of the wave-like nature of particles, like photons, passing through both slits simultaneously. An interference pattern is formed when the waves interact with the base. Actually, that's not... I thought that when I first read this, first time I saw this... Yeah. Here, let's... I'm just coming up or trying to come up with a investigation on. In the double slit experiment, a particle's behavior results in the observed interference pattern when the experiment is performed with single particles such as photons, and the pattern emerges. Okay, they're getting into more of the scientific. So that's again what happens when Young's double slit, particles pattern double slit and string. I looked at this before and I actually saw the explanation, and I'm not seeing any more. I apologize for this. It's just... Okay, that... Again, they're getting into the experiment. So, it implies that it's a plane of object close to... Okay, they're just going into the physics behind... yeah, and Wiki's not... Oh, I'm saying pattern. Should have been experiment. Experiment. Okay, so this now, the Google result is showing the consequence of observation. They're saying in the double slit experiment, the act of observing which slit a particle passes through destroys interference pattern, causing it to behave like a particle rather than a wave. This observation demonstrates the observer effect, where the act of measuring a quantum property changes the property itself. Of course, here's a more detailed explanation, because here they kind of explain it, but again, if you're not really, you're not scientific in the way you think or look at stuff, you may not really understand it. But they're saying here, this observation demonstrates the observer effect, which is the actual result that they're trying to explain, where the act of measuring a quantum property changes the property itself. That's where it stands out. We're saying it's being measured and it's not technically being observed in that humanistic way of looking. It says, "Oh, I can see this. I can see the particle going through." That's not what they're saying here. They're saying that they're actually measuring it. They're basically saying, "We're measuring it where we can see the particle move through, and some sort of device that maybe can actually capture the device and see it move through the slit." And let's see the observer effect. When you try to observe which slit a particle passes through, the interference pattern disappears. This is because the act of observing, even indirectly, changes the particle's behavior, causing it to behave more like a particle and less like a wave. Okay, so that actually is not. Double slit experiment, what happens? Just trying to find something that I'll actually. No, okay. I think this may be the result. It might have actually been the way that. Okay, no. In the double slit experiment, the observer effect is not caused by a conscious human observer. Instead, the effect is triggered by the very act of measurement or detection. Okay, that's what I wanted to get to, and I just wanted to make sure people understood, as I'm spending a lot of time on this, that what was stated in the experiment is not true. It's not true. And that bothers me, because the conclusions that are going to be indicated afterwards is because of that. Basically, the lie is what's being used for the conclusions that are being made. I don't like that at all in science. That's heavily disliked. When a misrepresentation of information is done for a way of explaining something that is not correct in general. And I don't like that, but that's what I want to get to is, and again, I obviously saw this video beforehand, and this, when I first saw it, is, ooh, that bothered me. I remember the double slit experiment in physics and that. I have to say, I don't actually remember this aspect of this observer effect. The thing that caught me when I first read this is the aspect of how can a particle act like a particle sometimes, and how can it act like a wave sometimes? That's the big question. You know, everybody who watches this, that should be the thing that actually stands out. Now, there were some explanations about exactly why did it change when it was being observed. And there were some things where they're saying it could be the aspect of potentially maybe the observation unit, the device that was used to make the observation or make the measurement, was modifying the particle in some sort of fashion where it didn't, convert or transfer to that, energy form. And because it didn't transfer to that energy form, it stayed as a particle and reacted like a particle would be expected to react. That's an explanation I've heard. Now, again, the physicists don't actually know if that's what's happening. This still is a question mark. They don't know why a particle behaves like a wave sometimes and why it behaves like a particle sometimes. And they certainly don't know why, when the measurement of the particle as it's going through the slit is reacting the way it's reacting. They don't know, and this is a question mark in this particular experiment. And this area is actually is in the quantum mechanics area, and there are tons of things in quantum mechanics that happen that the physicists have no understanding why it happens. They have absolutely zero. Like, they're making observations, they're doing experiments, and they actually have conclusions that are expected based on the understanding of actually how things should operate. And they are not seeing at all the expected outcome. And this actually is common in quantum mechanics. This being actually one of the areas of it, and again, you can sit there and you look at it and you try to make the experiment. You can try to understand the experiment to the best of your ability. Now, the religious people, we're going to continue, and you're going to hear conclusions that are being made, and I'm going to be asking questions, based on that. The first part here, I'm not going to. This isn't say, "Hey, do you believe this is God?" It's strange, but to be honest, I don't see anything there that indicates a God. It's strange. For sure, it's strange. Absolutely, it's strange. And do we have any answer for it? No. And that is the de facto answer in science, is when you don't have an answer, you say, I don't have an answer. When you say, when you don't have an understanding, you say, I don't have an understanding. You don't make a conclusion based on things you presume or can perceive can be the result of what's happening. In science, you just don't do that. So let's start. I know this has been going on a really long time, and I do apologize for that. But again, this is allowing my stream to go a little bit longer, so if people do get on, at least they can ask me questions. And I don't see anybody getting on, so we still don't have any people starting up or at least joining my live chat.
But quantum physics was revealing something different. What it showed was that reality doesn't exist in a fixed state until it is measured. That nothing is real until someone becomes aware of it. This wasn't just about particles anymore. It was about consciousness. It was about awareness itself, something science had never dared to consider as a causal force in the physical world. And suddenly, an experiment meant to study matter ended up suggesting that the mind might be a central player in shaping what we call reality.
Okay, so you can see that the declaration is being continued here, and it's a lie, and that does bother me that it's a lie. It's an absolute 100% lie. The aspect of, why the science community doesn't, present it this way is because this is what's not occurring. This is not part of the observations that are occurring in this experiment. And this video here, the narrator is explaining things in a way, sounds like it's scientifically being explained, but it's not. It's making assumptions based on basically invalid conclusions.
If observation creates change at a quantum level, then consciousness is not just passive, it's participatory. That means we are not merely products of the universe. We are co-creators within it. But this notion doesn't sit well within the framework of institutions built on hierarchy, dependence, and external authority. Religious structures that claim exclusive access to the divine. Scientific communities that demand physical proof of metaphysical ideas. Political systems that rely on masses believing they are powerless. Throughout history, ideas that threaten centralized control have been either discredited, buried, or reframed to fit the dominant narrative.
Okay, so that's a continuation, and it's getting to the point that there are things that give the ability to understand things at a higher level that the groups that actually are involved in these activities are not presenting. So technically they're saying that, we'll say, the scientific community, and they actually did make a reference to the religious community, are attempting to hide things. But again, that's all based on a lie. So I don't know exactly how they can make a conclusion that's not actually based on a correct statement.
The discovery that could have unified science and spirituality was quietly sidelined. But it never disappeared. It still exists, in the data, in the papers, and most of all, in the questions that refuse to go away. If consciousness truly influences matter, then the boundary between the observer and the observed begins to dissolve. You are no longer separate from the world around you. The thoughts you think, the focus you hold, the awareness you bring, they are not passive states of mind, but active forces. And that changes everything. Suddenly, prayer, meditation, visualization, practices often dismissed as mystical or unscientific, begin to take on new meaning.
Okay, so now they're talking about the aspects of this process of observing to be extremely powerful, and that things that are occurring is because of observation. Now, this comes from the initial invalid conclusions that were being made about something was happening because it was being observed. And that premise is, or at least that thinking was, it was being observed by a human being. And it wasn't. Being measured. And the device is measuring some sort of aspect of what is being measured. And there was conclusions that were being seen because of it. But the aspect of, hey, observation is occurring, and because observation is occurring, all these things are the result of it. Now, a big thing that the video is not seeing correctly or not presenting things correctly is the aspect of, we're talking at a quantum level. So all the things that are being seen is at an atomic level or smaller. And that when we get into larger objects, these things actually don't happen. Like you can certainly take, let's say, a tennis ball, and you can make a double slit in your yard, and you can throw tennis balls through these slits. You know, and you can have a backing board, a board used to monitor the actual impact of the balls as they go through the slits. And you know what you're going to find? They behave like particles. They behave like balls. This is to say, why doesn't that actually generate the wave pattern? It's because we're dealing with things that are too large. All these experiments deal with things extremely small. The quantum mechanics actually is dealing with things at the atomic level. So if the premise that your mind is working and doing things with things that are observed, well, it's not things observed across the board. It's not everything that's observed, if at least you're following the premise that this video is trying to state. These observations made from the scientist were done with things at a very small level, atomic, nothing larger.
then the question of God becomes not a matter of belief, but a matter of perception. Maybe God isn't somewhere out there, watching us from above. Maybe consciousness is the divine spark itself, woven into every moment, every atom, every observer. This isn't just a theory. It's a challenge. A challenge to everything we've been taught about reality, identity, and control. Because if it's true, then each of us holds more power than we've been allowed to imagine. And that power begins the moment we realize that what we observe observes us back. So if this is true, if the universe is fundamentally responsive to consciousness, then the greatest discovery of all isn't out there in space or deep inside a particle. It's within you. The power to affect the world around you doesn't come from force, technology, or control. It comes from awareness, from the simple, profound act of being present and intentional in a universe that listens.
Okay, there was a lot of statements that were made in that particular part. The one thing that stood out to me is it almost kind of looked like they were changing the perspective of what a God is. It almost seemed like they were saying that life in general is God, because all the things that we are seeing is something that's basically a part of life, something that's involved with everybody, everything, I guess, and that all the things, I guess, that we wonder about is just things that are natural in the perspective of how this video is trying to present it. You religious people, what do you think? I really want to know what you guys think, because this seems like it was stretching maybe the understanding of what a God is. I actually don't remember the next part after this. I don't know if they actually changed this premise or maybe try to make a clarification of this God thing. But if they do, then hopefully maybe they make a more concrete presentation of actually what they are saying a God is. But this point is, I'm actually not really sure what they mean by a God. If it actually is just an aspect of it's everything, it's all around us, it's a part of who we are. Okay, fine. And we could say that that actually is something that you've heard religious people say is God is around you, he's constantly there, and maybe that's what they're referring to. I don't know.
And if the double slit experiment taught us anything, it's that the universe responds differently when it's being watched, which means that your attention carries weight, your focus carries form. What ancient mystics called the divine spark, modern physics may call the observer effect. But the message is the same. Consciousness is not meaningless. You are not a mistake, an accident, or a bystander. You are a participant in a field of possibility that is shaped by what you notice, what you believe, and what you expect.
Okay, to me this is just a continuation. There's no clarity about this God that they're referring to in the previous part. And this aspect that reiterating the idea of observation has a consequence, which they're basing this on, obviously, the experiment. And as I stated from the beginning of this video, that's an invalid statement. It certainly is an invalid conclusion.
Why was this discovery framed as strange instead of sacred? Maybe because a society of truly conscious people can't be easily controlled. Maybe because the moment you realize you are not a mistake in a dead universe, but a creator in a conscious one, you stop waiting for permission to live with purpose. So now you know. A forgotten experiment, a hidden truth, a glimpse at the divine through the lens of science. The only question that remains is, what will you do with it? Will you dismiss it, or will you start to watch more closely, knowing that something might just be watching back?
Okay, so that's a finalization and not really saying anything more. Really came down to the aspect of we now showed you the truth. What are you going to do? Me personally, I'm going to evaluate the truth. And I already did. I already knew about the experiment, so this was actually nothing new to me. And when I first saw the conclusions they were making, that threw me off guard because I'm wondering in my mind what exactly was the explanation about why you see waves, why you see particles. I actually didn't remember, but I do not remember anybody saying, oh yeah, it's because you were watching this. I don't remember any of the teachers, any of the professors, when they were going over this topic, them saying, yeah, you got to wonder about this, this activity where it happens this way, and when you go and you watch it, you physically look down on it, it happens a different way. And that never came up at all in any of the courses I took that actually went over this particular experiment. It was an aspect of the big thing, like I said initially or previously, is, or at least the thing that stood out to me, is the aspect of how can something operate one way and operate another way? Or let's say expected to operate one way, but seeing it operate another way. The big thing here is, how is a particle behaving like a wave? That's the thing that's very strange to me. Now, this aspect of, why does it go from operating like a wave or behaving like a wave to behaving like a particle? Because of the measurement activity. Let's use measurement now. We'll get away from observation. If you want me to use observation, no, I'm not going to do that. You can blame me for not using the terminology that was used in the video, but again, as I explained, the video was using that point of review, point of evaluation, point of conclusion incorrectly. It's not an observation. It's a measurement. And, we know the fact that this is basically unknowns. This is unknowns by the scientific community. They're still trying to figure this out. They haven't. So if you want to maybe take a break on, religious matters, and you want to get into some maybe, hardcore, scientific physics arenas, this is one of them. There are people who are still studying this today. Like, and these observations were made hundreds of years ago. The initial observations were made hundreds of years ago, and they've just been fine-tuning it as time gone along. They still don't know. They still don't have an answer for this, unless they do have an answer for it, and I didn't see it. But again, didn't see anything in my investigation for this video review. And the big thing that I pointed out here at the beginning was the aspect of there was a misrepresentation, what I was calling a lie. And, maybe the religious people will look at this and goes, well, that's the conclusion that they were seeing. Maybe you're not fairly, representing exactly how they were seeing things. And I would say, I can give you that if it wasn't for the fact that this was something that was talked about extensively from when this experiment was first being done. There were people asking about the clarity about what do you mean by observation, and it was clarified what was actually being meant. So in that light, the video and the people who put this video together, they had the information there talking about the explicitness of actually what was being done in the experiment. And for me, they chose to misrepresent that. They chose to take that information and say, hey, this is a God that's the result, the conclusion, the whatever? I don't know. Religious people, yeah, here's your questions. Can you explain to me why this information that's presented is an explanation for the existence of a God? I'm going to tell you right now, I don't see it. But again, you know my background, you know the way I look at things, so you could say, hey, you're biased. And let's just accept the fact that I'm biased, but that's okay. I can be biased. But my bias is actually based on what I know, what I understand. Now, maybe I made a mistake. And I'm not going to dispute the fact that I could make a mistake. Everybody can make a mistake. So, religious people, apologists, because you probably, jump on this because the aspect of it gets in this, more intense kind of determination. I was going to say evaluation review, but technically nobody here evaluated or reviewed anything. They just heard about, and looked at, things that were being done and then made conclusions from that. But I want to know from the people here on the religious point of view, the apologists, the theists, the religious people, can you explain this to me? Did I make a huge, major mistake in the fact that maybe I misread something? I didn't see something clearly? I didn't hear things correctly. That what was being explained was this, and I missed it. If you guys can do that, that will be great, and I will thank you very much for that. With that said, I'm actually going to stop this video that's actually getting to be a bit long now. I want to thank everybody for watching. I didn't get any people to join my live chat, and again, that's something that I'm trying to get going because I want these videos to actually be, videos. I don't necessarily want to be doing videos all the time. I actually want to be talking with people. So, you religious people out there, I would like you to join my videos. I'm trying to do them every day at 11 a.m., even though I'm not saying that's concrete, but that's actually my target, just to have a schedule that I can maybe try to maintain. And if the religious people, if the apologists, if the theists, if you can join me at that time, that would be great because I want to ask you guys the questions. I want to see what you guys think. I want to see the way you guys look at stuff. Now, I don't want the religious people thinking that this is going to be a debate. I don't want to debate you. My evaluations of this video or these videos, it may look like it's me trying to debate, but I'm not really talking with anybody, so it's not technically a debate. It's me really making comments about what I'm seeing. And when I talk to you, when I start talking to people directly, I will be asking questions, but I don't want you to feel like you're being attacked, you're being, controlled and manipulated, or all those words you use about somebody who's doing something to another person in a way that's maybe not considered to be appropriate, at least from their perspective. I don't want you to feel that that's what I want to do or that's what I would try to be attempting to do. Actually, it's just coming down to just asking questions and listening to the explanations. Now, I'm hoping the aspect that probably going to have more questions as I go through the process of asking questions, but I don't want religious people feeling as though it's attack. It's just to get a better understanding of why you believe and why you look at things the way you look at them. And if we can get that done, that would be great. And that's what I'm hoping we can start soon. And again, let's leave it there. And again, I thank you very much for listening to my video.